So I built this table so that you could see all aspects of the barrel, and we'll talk a little bit about it in depth. All right, so you can choose to fill this out. I tried to design the page to look almost like when you're watching CSI and they have that autopsy outline of the body. You can also fill in some of the flaws, cracks, and other issues that it had. So when we look at this barrel, it's a used barrel. It is now empty. This was racked, right? But this is a hybrid because we ended up using it almost like a palletized barrel because of the holes, and I'll show you why. So the bung on this one is going to be a 2-inch bung. Palletized tends to be 2 1/8 for some reason. They just drill a tapered bung into it that's a little bit different size. And then you're going to see here probably why this couldn't be put on its side. So as you look right here, this, which they call boogers, is where the alcohol, the whiskey has come through and then congealed almost like a sticky syrup, and then over time it hardens. It doesn't get as hard as amber, but it's pretty, if you were to chip at that, while it looks shiny and it might be looking gooey, it's probably pretty solid. And that seals a crack or a flaw. However, this isn't a good sign to see the barrel staves split or broken, and this is the source of whatever this leak was. Remember, that's the top side as it sat up, and you can see that the liquid probably had to be below this level, and when we went to its side, it was finding that hole or that leak. So you're getting a kind of a snapshot at a pretty unique barrel in the sense that this was flawed, but still producing some delicious tasting whiskey. You can see some other of those boogers or those small leaks on the side around the bung. There's also, you know, some of that discoloration and some of that sticky kind of residue from it leaking through the actual bung aperture. There are 6 rings on a standard barrel, but if you want to know a little piece of insider history, if you're up in Canada and you see one that has 8 rings on it, the old style, pre-1960, was to use extra steel rings. So I'm like, what do you mean pre-1960? They said, well, everything that's in that barrel is at least 50 years old, and it's still holding liquid, which is crazy to me. And then I said, wow, that's crazy. And the guy goes, well, it's even crazier is that the wood that's in that barrel is older than Canada itself. So the tree had to grow, they harvested it, they dried it, and then in the 50s, they made this barrel, and it's still holding liquid, which leads to the fact that barrels, well-made barrel, well-conditioned, taken care of, can last up to 60 years generally, even if you're bouncing it from American bourbon to Scotland to rum to tequila for añejo or a reposado. But as long as you're keeping the barrel kind of well-conditioned and full, it does okay for a very, very long period of time. I always thought that was fascinating. So, as you look at the other information on here, the belly diameter is, of course, where it's widest, just like it would have a pot belly, and I'll tell you what that measurement is right now, but we're looking at 26 inches on the belly, and then the length is going to be 35 inches high. So I know this to be an American standard barrel, but an American standard barrel is 53 gallons. When you get to wine casks or some of those other casks like the Armagnac or Cognac, you're looking at 59 gallons or greater. When this gets sent to Scotland, it's taken apart and then the staves re-put together, slightly larger, so it goes from holding 200 liters of liquid to a 250 liter cask, which is a hogshead. So they're using American ex-bourbon staves, but of course they have to make the end cap even bigger than it is here. They generally ship it flat pack because unless it's an American virgin barrel, for example, like the Glenfiddich 14-year bourbon wood cask that they use, they will use those, they'll let the cooperage in America make the cask in the beginning. That's now changing because it's cheaper to do it in-house. But generally speaking, the coopers are making the larger size cask because the Scottish tax standard for volume is different from the United States. Now we can use wine casks, which are 59 gallon. In fact, we have some there in the other room. However, we just record it as a tax log difference. But most of their rails in a, what would be called a, when you have a rick house, they're set up for a very specific size. So you can't just start rolling in giant barrels that don't fit into the rick or the rack. It's just, rick is a slang for rack. But in the dunnage style warehouses in Scotland, and the way that their taxes are recorded, and a lot of the money that comes out of the Scottish industry goes to pay the crown, they require a larger size just for that tax purpose. So two different reasons why they have different sizes, but in the end, they're just making whiskey, so you got to barrel age it. But generally speaking, all whiskey goes in clear, like vodka, and all of your color, unless somebody's adding color, and about 60 to 70% of your flavor comes from the actual barrel. So in the United States, we use Quercus alba, which is American white oak, and generally speaking, all the law requires that it be a virgin charred cask. First use, charred. So I could crack this barrel open, but as I'm already sweating through most of my clothes, I'll make it easy for you to see this. This is a charred barrel, and it's in an umbrella bag because as soon as you touch this, you will smudge everything that it touches. But this is what they call a char for, or an alligator char. And literally, like charcoal, black smudge as soon as you touch it. Okay? Now, on this stave is also what we call the red line. The red line is how far the whiskey has penetrated into the wood. And it's not really like time. It's not like if it's in 8 years, it goes farther in. It really is based on the porosity of the wood and also the position of it. So the barrel staves on the bottom will have this because the hydraulic or static pressure will push that down farther, whereas this top stave where the bung is will still absorb it and pull it into it, but not quite as deep as the bottom ones as it's pushed down into it. So I can pass this around, but that's a pretty messy one. What I did bring also is a European cask. So right off the bat, you can see if we hold it up to this barrel that it's a different size. So that extra length and this extra belly, see how it looks almost like it's bent? This is typical to a sherry or a port style cask. You can again see the red line, although it's pretty faded in this, and it looks like a darker line closer to the bottom here, right? But the interesting thing about this is a toast. So when you toast it, it's still a heat treatment of the inside of the barrel, but it does not leave that smudge char residue. So when we talk about toasted versus charred, they're both doing the same thing in the sense that heat is breaking up the chemical compounds in the wood near the surface that touches the liquid, and that's going to give you flavor and color. The difference with the toast is the less heat releases certain chemical compounds that might be a little bit more vanilla forward, or like some people say in the berry or fruit notes. And a darker char is more the caramel, toasted coconut, butterscotch kind of richer, darker notes, and over time adds to a dryness on the sides of tongue. So very old whiskey in a virgin char are very drying. People see this a lot in a lot of the Texas whiskeys because the heat and the wood definitely makes it like you feel it on the sides of your tongue. So you can also kiln dry your wood. So we prefer to use wood that has been air dried and is either a Kelvin or an independent stave barrel. And the reason for that is that if you air dry, then it naturally releases the moisture from the wood. And then the second thing is if you kiln dry, you've added another heat process, right? People aren't thinking about this, but it's breaking up certain chemical compounds in the wood just because you're in basically an oven drying out the wood. And I can almost always taste craft distillery because it releases a compound that I associate closely with ethyl acetate, which is a very distinctive craft flavor or I can tell that they've kiln dried the barrel. But there are people out there who have to make barrels faster or cheaper than the big contracts that you might have at like the mega distilleries. And so they're running with what they can do, and they're making great product just as well. But in all things being equal, I would prefer an air-dried, more expensive Cadillac of barrels, independent stave or Kelvin barrel, just chugging away doing the work. And the char, like Rabbit Hole for instance, it is using a toast and then subjecting it to a char on some of their barrels, because they want the combination of both those flavors instead of just the heat blasting in for the char and having that overwhelming flavor on what they're doing. So there are ways you can get creative, but in the end, to be called bourbon, to be made in the United States, even with those rye whiskeys, it has to be a virgin charred cask. You can toast it before, you can put it in a sous vide machine, you can do all sorts of fun things, but in the end, it has to be a virgin charred cask. And there's another thing that's in the backstory of that, which is that when Jim Beam dumps for 250 barrels for their white label, if you have high and low spots over 250 barrels, it's going to average out to give you a very consistent flavor. With a lot of the craft guys, they are making stuff at a 5, 10 barrel, so you can't hide or balance out some of those flaws. So if a lot of them have that characteristic from the kiln drying, it tends to accentuate it instead of balance it out. So they have like a double-sided problem, and that is that they can't use a large batch to kind of get one, consistency, so I see a lot more variety in craft stuff, and two, they can't get some of the flavors that I don't enjoy, but other people may like. They can't do anything with it. But fortunately, you know, when somebody we were saying before, oh, they put stuff in barrels to get rid of this off taste. When you pick our barrels, it tastes as it tastes. So anything that you're going to add on is just going to be an additional kind of twist or accent to those flavors that you like, and trying to bring something different to the table. All right, I've got a lot of talking, but we haven't really tasted anything. So prime barrel, the first one at the top of the tasting mat, is a rye. I would say the ryes tend to have a little bit more of a palate busting approach, but I want to put you guys at the top of the page. So let's do this. Let's go to Candy Apple Brown, second from the bottom. So if somebody has the bottle in front of them, this was a Barrel Master Select, meaning that I went in, I found this one, I really liked it, and so we bottled it, and the company sent out a couple cases here, a couple cases there, and a lot of people inside the company bought this. It was not released as a store release per se. So what's the mash bill on that one? 60-36-4. Okay, so it's a high rye. And the 4% is the barley, because on our 21s we use 9% malted barley because the barley adds a spice. But if you have 36% rye, you're getting your spice from the rye, and the 4% malted barley is part of that. So taste it, see if you like it. One of the things I tend to find in some of our 36% or high rye bourbons are a little bit of a candied note, almost like caramelized or that hard candy kind of flavor. But then mixed with the caramel of this, I kind of got like a candy apple, and then I do some stuff with cars, so a very famous car color is candy apple red, but I decided to name this Candy Apple Brown, and that's how the name came up. I also try and name stuff so that I can remember it, because if you were to tell me like barrel number 460, and then I really like 523, and I'm like, I don't know what you're saying. But if you tell me the name, I can kind of key into what as a mnemonic, how I remember talking about that particular barrel, which we're going to see in Fifth Element and some other ones a little bit later. So cask strength, non-chill filtered. You can add a couple drops of water if you like. I don't know, I liked it. We're generally on the shelf at probably under $60 for a cask strength single barrel expression. You might be able to find this in a store out there, but this was pretty popular, and a lot of people were kind of running around collecting it when they found that they liked it. Thumbs up, thumbs down.
It's definitely on the sweet side.
Yeah. But that's why I combine that candy with that kind of apple saucy taste. Yeah. But as with everything, a good whiskey, even if it's higher proof strength, it will mask the heat. So everything that you're going to taste here, if we've done a good job or you've done a good pick, you got to be careful. This stuff's, we label what it is, but you're looking at 118 to 125, stuff like that. So let's move up to the halvesies, which is labeled on your page as beautiful barley. Now this one, I wanted to kind of showcase a little bit of a different mash bill than most people are used to. This is a rye. It's not obviously the same proportion of rye as the prime barrel, but this is 49% malted barley. And this barrel was split between a store and Binny's. That's why it was called halvesies. But it's also halvesies because the mash bill is almost half rye, almost half single malt or malted barley. And this was aged, I think, in Indiana. And one of the things that I like to talk about when people talk about warehouses, and everyone has Deatsville and their favorite warehouse and which warehouse H and fifth level. Everything that you're going to see in whiskey is a bell curve. So if you're telling me that the 6th floor is where the best stuff is made, why wouldn't MGP just move everything to the 6th floor before they sold it? Doesn't mean it's been aged there the whole time. But there are a lot of people that like kind of key in on this warehouse produces the best liquid, and it's BS. At the tail end, you're going to have awful stuff. At the front end, you're going to have exceptional stuff. And the vast majority of what you have in that curve is going to be average. Doesn't matter where it is. The heat could be different, but you're always going to get that bell curve distribution. It's just science. So I kind of go off a little bit, or I ramble on about what I call moneyball whiskeys, which are people who can pick a good whiskey without ever tasting or nosing it, which I think is complete crock. You actually have to get your nose and your taste buds on it. The fact that you got it from Warehouse K, level 3, it's 6.5 years, and it's using this mash bill, doesn't tell you anything other than that you might like some of those qualities, unless you get it from the good part, the exceptional part, to the middle of the pack, and then the rest of them, half of them are going to be not that great. Every barrel is different. Okay, so this is different. Yeah. Yeah. But malt is the spiciest of grains, followed by rye, followed by kind of a toss-up between corn and wheat. Wheat tends to be silkier, smoother, more of a mouthfeel, but corn does a little bit more sweetness. And so when you substitute that rye and the malt, it actually is, I think, a good synergy. And like I said before, I like single malts, I like Scottish whiskey, and so this, as a rye, because it is real, legit rye, is fascinating to me, and I kind of enjoyed that. So.